Awesome.
But I think there's an easy.
What is it? January 2018. First meeting in 2018.
Yes.
All right. Pretty awesome. I usually don't like to waste you guys' time to talk about jobs, but we do have one job that I think would be relevant. It's a senior system administrator, and it's not a contract. So this would be a direct placement, direct with Best Western. They want to pay between $80,000 and $90,000, and everybody pretty much in this room I think could do the job. Bryce can tell a little bit more about Best Western. I'm not very familiar with it. We're just kind of working there, the environment. Anything like that.
Yeah, we've done a lot with them as a customer on the application side of the house. We're doing a full dev transformation with just the way that they're running all of their internal applications. We're doing development overseas for them. We're running that through. We're running it through our Phoenix office because they're local here to Phoenix, but a lot of like the personnel are out of India. But then on the other side of the house, I've worked with them a few times on different positions here in the Valley. They're located up off the 17 and the 101, so like 27th Avenue. They're just on the north half of the Loop 101. It's one of their larger headquartered facilities. So we've got a few folks out there that are still currently working with Best Western that are more within network engineering side of the house. One of their lead architects on their architecture team we placed out there. He's full-time. Overall, it's a pretty casual environment. Everybody's kind of jeans and a t-shirt. Managers are jeans and a polo, tennis shoes, as long as you don't look like a bum.
Straightforward.
Yeah, the environment on all the teams that I've worked on, it's pretty much get in, do your job, go home. They're not, sitting over your shoulder with like metrics and crap like that. It's just, hey, are you getting the work done? Okay, cool, good job. Right?
But yeah, the main reason I want to bring it up is because it's not a contract. I know a lot of the stuff we see is contract or contract to hire. This is just right in straight away, full-time employee, benefits, 401k, the whole nine. So if you guys have anybody that you think would be interested, I have some business cards up here. We'll have Bryce leave some as well, and Oliver has all my contact information. So definitely would appreciate that. Other than that, we'll go ahead and throw it back to Adam, let you guys get this kicked off and get out of your hair.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Thank you. Thanks for the pizza. Cool.
Yes, thanks for the pizza.
All right. It is all you, Adam.
You ready for the spiel?
I am.
All right. Okay, so before we start, I want this to be interactive. I did this talk on YouTube Live maybe 6-8 months ago or something, and I don't really with that. I couldn't really answer a lot of questions or anything. So, as with all the talks that I do and things, I please interrupt me at any time. You're not gonna piss me off or anything because I'm in the moment. But so I want to make this as back and forth as possible. So if I'm going too fast, tell me to slow down. If you really want to dive into something, that's fine. I don't anticipate going over all the slides that I have. I'm going to probably skip around a little bit to kind of get past some of the fluff that's in there, but just feel free to interrupt me at any time. All right. So the first and usual slide, for those that don't know me, I am Adam Bertram. I do a lot of training courses on Pluralsight, do a whole lot of writing, freelance writer, consultant, blog at adamtheautomator.com, and I'm on Twitter at ADBertram. All right, so what to expect in this talk. So first of all, maybe I can see your faces. I want to go into the inception again. There we go. All right, I think I can see faces. Yes. So how many of you guys have ever used Pester at all?
We have one. If you shout, it will look at you.
Oh, hello.
All right. So there's this may be going over the people that have never used Pester before. It may be going over your heads a little bit. So if there's anything in Pester, if you don't see something that you don't understand, just let me know. Since I want this to be interactive, we can go into even just kind of the intricacies of how Pester works if you want. But so the talk itself is not necessarily going to be at Pester how to, but we can definitely get into that if that's what the majority of you guys want. And the second thing, it's going to be what I really I really harp on a lot of the stuff that a lot of the content I produce is test thinking and mentality. So you can test infrastructure with all kinds of different tools. The tools do not matter. What really matters is how you think about testing, especially the whole testing mentality. Is some people just still don't really understand it that well. And this is one talk that I like to do to kind of give you an idea of it's really not. It's not as simple as what you think. You think, well, infrastructure testing, I want to test a file or a registry key, or if a server is where I thought it was. You'll kind of see once you get involved in it, you'll see that it takes a little bit of a different thinking. And then the third one is focusing on implementing these designs with code. So we always, whenever we write a script or we provision a virtual machine or we do, change anything in the environment, we right click and deploy, or we do things with the GUI. Especially, it's not repeatable. The reason we like PowerShell is because we can write scripts that can then be repeated. We document with code. And infrastructure testing, the testing piece, and especially Pester, is a great way to give you that binary 1 or a 0. Is it working or is it not working? Because as you guys definitely know, when you do deploy an application, or just about anything, it's never as simple as what the user thinks it is. They're like, well, just install this software. Well, okay. Well, is your machine on? Is your registry, all those settings right? Is all the files in the right spot? Do you have permission? So there's a lot of different details in there that you have to manage. And if you don't do write those tests and implement that stuff in code, then you're going to forget half the things and you have to do it over again. Okay, just a quick pitch on the Pester book. Originally started the Pester book with Don Jones, and he backed out. I don't know, a few months after we started. But so right now the Pester book is mine. Unfortunately, I haven't updated it in a while, but luckily I probably got 90% of it done. So if you're interested in learning more about unit testing, infrastructure testing, or just learning Pester in general, I have a link here. And I didn't think about this before, but have I given you guys a free link or a free copy of this yet for your group? I don't think I have.
I don't think you have yet.
Okay. Well, at the end we can do some kind of drawing or something like that, and I'll just give away a free copy to you guys whoever needs it. All right. So, what is infrastructure testing? All right. So I've got a bunch of slides. I'm going to skip over a ton of these, but for those of you that don't really understand what infrastructure testing is, it's kind of a hybrid between what a software developer thinks of testing and what somebody in DevOps thinks of testing, or even a sysadmin or an IT pro. So infrastructure testing, in the definition, it's a really loose definition, but in the definition that I'm using here, it's define an expected environmental state. What does that mean? Well, that means, let's say, it's something extremely simple. A file is on a specific server. It's in a specific folder. It has a specific ACL set on it. It's all the attributes of a particular object, for lack of a better term. It could be a registry key, a file, a VM, just about anything. So the next is run the code to retrieve the actual state. So let's say that we're just talking about a simple file. A file has a lot of attributes. It could have a folder. It could be in a specific folder, the permissions, a specific name. The code, we're going to write the code to retrieve all the attributes that we care about. And then the third one there is we're going to compare the two. So let's say that I want a file called file.txt in C folder, some kind of folder. The first one, when we define the environmental state, we're going to define, I expect this file, the name is going to be file.txt, and it's going to be in the folder C drive folder. whenever we define that in some kind of manifest, it really doesn't matter. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but you can even build your own. But for now, let's just say it's just in a simple text file somewhere. This isn't PowerShell. Just open up Notepad and say, I want file.txt, the name and the attribute. Then run the code. That's when, in this instance, we're going to be using PowerShell. So we're going to be using PowerShell to do, get item or get child item to query where that file is supposed to be. And then the third one is compare the two. We're going to see what all the attributes of that file in this instance are different. So that's kind of the three components that I define of that is infrastructure testing. And then finally, it's not unit testing. Unit testing is a more of a application development thing. Pester is technically a unit testing framework, but I found that I do a lot of unit testing, but at the same time, not a lot of IT pros and sysadmins. It's really kind of a more of a dev thing, and I don't. I focus a lot of it on the Pester book. So if you know about unit testing, you're familiar with it. That's not something we're going to cover today. Blah 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 blah. All right. So this is what I was talking about: the infrastructure testing in the real world. So this is a single application that I had to write tests for, and a single application doesn't consist of just a file, like I said. In this instance, it was in Azure. So there's the Azure API gateway. There's dozens of APIs, the SQL database, the web app itself. All the source files that are uploaded. Do they get the right names? Are they in the right spot? There's all these different entities or objects, I guess you can say, that consist of, is this app working or not? Some people generalize, is the server up or is the app working? Well, you always give that, well, it depends. How do you define working? With the infrastructure test, you can define working, because if all the tests come back green, then it's working. That's the by far and away the best component of a good test, is that you can set a 0 or a 1, working or not working, and you can be positive that it is working when you intend it to be. All right. Yeah, we got this thing. Yeah, let's get that one. All right. So yeah, here's a good example of Pester output for just a component of that app that I was talking about. So Pester allows you to define different contexts, and those contexts are just a way to categorize different tests. As you can see here, that I've got a bunch of green, which is great. But you see, there's a bunch of different components. You have an API products component. I have a schema publishing component. I have a web app publishing component. And then inside of there, I have all the individual tests. And you can see here that there's 132 tests in just this. But this application itself had, I believe it was over 500 or 600 tests by the time it was done. So I can now confidently say, well, the app isn't working, is it up? You run the test after you build it, and you know exactly to answer that question, is it up or is it down? You can say definitively at that point. Let's see here. We'll skip through here. All right. So here's the first demo. We're going to do 3 different demos. So the first one is going to be just infrastructure testing 101. Really easy, really basic. All we're going to do is we're going to pretend like we've got a script somewhere, or maybe we're even just doing it manually. At this point, it really doesn't matter. We're just going to create an Active Directory user somehow. It doesn't really matter at this point how it's done. We hope that it's done with a script. It's automated somehow, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. The next part, we're going to create the get 80 user code. So you can see here we created the state that we're going to test is the 80 user exists. Then we're going to create the code just to get it. With PowerShell, everything's a get verb. So we're going to use get 80 user to pull that back. That's kind of the second phase of this. And then finally, that third phase is we're going to compare the two with Pester. Now, we don't necessarily even have to use Pester if we didn't want to. Pester just provides a really good framework to kind of bundle this up and has the right outputs and color coding schemes and everything like that. So we really didn't need to have to use Pester. The core component of this is just you define what you want. In this case, we're going to do it in Pester. We get what we want, and then we just compare the two. That's really the core basics of what we're going to be doing. All right, so let's see if you can see my Azure VM here. Oh, that's good.
Can you hear me now, by chance?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
It's Tom.
Oh, ended my session. What's going on with my VM here? Oh, that's not good. All right. Let's see if I can fix this.
It's not backwards.
Yeah, because it was his screen.
Anybody have any questions so far? No, we haven't got into a whole lot, but
You keep saying state, and what this makes me think of is why wouldn't I just use like a configuration management tool to manage the state of the machine, such as, or even Active Directory, make sure these users are created?
yep, you can. That's one thing that that you can do. Let's see. That there was a good. I think Steve Borowski termed this the best way, like using when you just depend on one source, then you're putting all of your confidence in, DSC or Chef or Puppet. Now, technically, they're probably going to be fine, but when you're like the test is kind of like the final, it's the golden. Shoot, what was the word that he said? It's kind of like the golden, the source of truth for everything. You can provision something with Chef or Puppet or any of this stuff. Maybe they have to have an agent. They have to have different configurations, and it can get complicated. But if you have like a single test suite of something like, you have a JSON file or an XML or even a PowerShell a hash table or something in a PSD1. No wonder it's not working. It stopped. That allows you this test allows you just a universal way to go back for any tool to figure out, are they out of compliance or not. I know it's kind of hard to grok, and you do have a good point, because that was a really common question of, well, why do we need tests if I have DSC or Chef? They actually do the test and then they set it. They apply the configuration. But I think that infrastructure tests, you can use that for like maybe a test environments or things like that. But tests are really good. Unit tests and these infrastructure tests are really good to do in like production. You say like, this is the authoritative source of what this thing is supposed to be, and if there's anything that's changed, any kind of configuration change, then your tests are going to show yes or no. But I definitely get what you're saying, and I definitely understand it may seem like, well, this is kind of redundant, but I can tell you this, that we've had times in our environment we just use a custom PowerShell solution to do software deployments and application deployments and stuff like that. And we've had multiple times to where we change something in the config that is supposed to, test and change it and make sure, but it didn't for some reason. It errored out, it wrote a warning somewhere, or something like we didn't catch it in time. And then the tests automatically run after the deployment runs, and the tests have caught problems like that multiple times. So it's kind of like a fail safe.
You can Pester test with Chef too. You just have to change it from inspect to Pester.
So just another level of verification, like you said, a fail-safe, which if you think in security, think in layers kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's even a compliance thing. I've seen have a bunch of security compliance tests, and like those tests are treated much more seriously than anything else in the organization, because they'll, like, a test is like the final verification of what it should be, and if those tests are wrong, then there's obviously a major problem. So I've seen that the tests are treated like gold, because if they don't meet the tests, then they're not how you would expect.
Thank you.
All right, so hopefully this thing will come up now.
The scenario
All
I have right now, related to a use case, is I need steady state management with some type of CMDB, but for Azure resources, not IaaS, not VMs, but web apps, the code deployed in them, the app settings that are deployed to them, the VPN gateways, because every time we build out we do quarterly product releases to all of our customers for hosting a web app, and Chef, Puppet, and DSC don't support steady state management for anything other than VM-based stuff. So that's my biggest interest currently right now, is potentially using Pester with a CMDB, calling Pester through an automation run broker, something like that, running it and validating and sending it back. Say again?
What CMDB are you using?
ServiceNow. So very much of a flat end piece, and then you really just customize and write graphs in between, essentially translators. And that's where I'm personally thinking about using Pester, because for Azure DSC, it's stuck at the VM level, and our product releases with one VM and about 300 different resources and that's per subscription. And every quarter, new product version, tear it down, brand new environment every time. So everything, network, everything gets torn down and brought up every time. So it's clean slates. So steady state management is a big thing for me, and I'm hoping Pester might be that middle spot. If that makes sense, without having to break the framework myself.
Yep, there you go. It's universal with Pester. Pester is just PowerShell under the hood, and you can do anything with PowerShell. It's not really relegated to the way that Chef works or the way you're supposed to configure Puppet or anything like that. It's right. It's completely universal. That's what I really like about it. All right, so just for the one-on-one example here, for this example, I'm just going to create a simple user. I've already created the user to make sure this all worked, but I'm just setting the user, and that user has a few different properties, a few different attributes that they're going to be important. Again, we're just going to define 1 or 0. Was this user created or is it not? Not that that the SAM account name exists in Active Directory somewhere. We're taking it a step further, which is what the whole purpose of infrastructure testing is, to get granular about things, so you know exactly that it's in the state that you want it to be in. So in this instance, an Active Directory user has a name, a first name, a last name, a title, a path. It's going to be in the root. It has initials. It has all these different attributes, and the combination of all these attributes defines, did it do its job? Is that user in the right spot? So I ran this. I don't have to necessarily run this in a script. The user just got created somehow. And in Pester, we have a concept of describe blocks. So we have a Pester test. Pester is just PowerShell script that's optionally ends with .tests.ps1. And inside here, describe is like the first category. You can rename these describe blocks whatever you want. With an infrastructure test, you probably will categorize these as in like this 80 user creation. Maybe this is part of some big employee provisioning script or something, and then you'll have another describe block called home folder creation or exchange mailbox creation. How you categorize these tests is up to you. So the describe block is kind of like the first way to separate these things out. And then inside of the describe block is where you have the for an infrastructure test. Pester is naturally a unit testing framework, It wasn't necessarily built for infrastructure testing. There's some other framework like Posh spec that are built on top of Pester. There's a few different projects out there that are built on top that are built more specifically for it. But in my opinion, it's not a big deal at all. You just kind of have to follow the similar framework of, in this case, we're going to arrange, act, and assert. Don't worry about the terminology. It's not important at this point. But for a test, it's all about arranging. So gathering up all the code that you need to run the test. Act, which is act on the code, execute the code, gather up the state of the whatever it is, and assert, which is assert that it should match a specific state. So again, those three components: define what you want, get the state of whatever you want, and then finally just compare the two. So that's kind of the layman's term for the common arrange, act, and assert methodology. So the first test is we obviously need to get the user, figure out, grab all the attributes about that thing and store it somewhere. So in the first line here, I'm just getting the user. I'm going to say that here, this is the username, which is the username up here that I define, which is just J Jones. So I'm going to grab that out, and that's the bare minimum that I need to do. Even if, this is going to bomb if J Jones isn't even here, but we need to kind of start from a ground level of, just to grab it, just to see if we can start to get that information. And then the ones we have here, these are the actual tests. So we have it blocks. In Pester, the describe block is the first kind of layer or the category. That could be AD user creation. Then it kind of gets more granular from there. Again, the way that I have these built is completely customizable. This may work, and this works in this situation and may not work in this. So don't pay attention to how I describe this. You could have a describe block that just says AD user should have the expected title, and just put another it block inside of there. So how this is all built is completely up to you. And I'll go do a lot about that, about test design in the Pester book. All right, so in this instance, I have a bunch of it blocks here. I think I got a few. So I define an it block in Pester as the smallest detail that I want to be able to roll up to define working or not. So in this instance, I'm testing a single Active Directory user, and that Active Directory user has a lot of different attributes. It has that title, enabled, initials, last name, first name, department. It has all of the the attributes that I define here. In my opinion, if I take the time in a script to manually type out given name equals Joe, surname equals Jones, title equals manage, looks like I missed my R, of accounting, I want to know that that stuff was set correctly. And I do that by setting these it blocks and saying should have the title. In this instance, since I already got the whole AD user object, I'm going to say AD user.title should be, and then I'm using the same parameters that I did up here. That's another good thing about these, how can Pester work. You can just with straight PowerShell, no fancy tools, nothing at all. We can just set up a splat here. We can set up the parameters in a splat, pass those splatted parameters to the actual function that's creating the user. And then once we have this defined, these splatted parameters, the tests can use those exact same parameters before. We don't have to duplicate. The attributes that it should be, because we have already defined them up here. That's another big thing I go about in the Pester book, was that the great thing about this is you're able to share the configuration that you have if you're able to make it happen that way. So I just do the same thing. This is pretty boring. Should have the title, should be enabled, should have expected middle initial, should have expected first name. So this all goes down through this, and you would continue all the different attributes that you want to test, that you would want to define. Is that user work or there or not? And a lot of these are here's one, be like. Normally you'll see should be, this it's just simply the same thing as -EQ in PowerShell. Should be like. Under the hood, this is doing just -like, and then doing the asterisk here, and then saying it should be like in here somewhere. So these are assertion operators. There's a whole ton of them in Pester, but since we're not going to be covering Pester specifically, I'm not going to go over them here. So this is the first test. So just to make this simple, normally you would run these things, run a test with invoke Pester, and I'm going to do that a little bit later. But for now, I can just copy and paste this whole describe block in my console and run it, and I'll show you what that looks like.
Do you need a minimum version of PowerShell, or do you have to install Pester in any way? Or?
As of server, let me see. As of Windows 10, I think it's just the first version of Windows 10 and Server 2016. I think Pester is installed by default, but it's a tiny. It's like 2 dot something. But the Pester module is a really tiny. You just run install module Pester, and you can just download it straight from the PowerShell gallery. It's really easy.
Okay.
Is this text on here? Can you see this text? Okay. Is it too small?
A little bit would be nice. Just a little bit.
A little bit. Oh, let's see here.
Enhance, yes. That works.
It's not very much. Can you? Let me just do 36. That's probably better. There we go. All right, so I'm just going to copy and paste this in here. That's all I'm doing. Wait for it. Oh, the argument is null. What did? Oh, I didn't grab this. I didn't know about, since I didn't actually run the new AD user command here. I gotta bring my variables in here. I need to bring all these in the session. Copy and paste. And again, oh, can I find an object? All right, so why can't I find the object? Let's see this. All right. Oh, I must have deleted it. No, that's good. So I can go through the whole thing. All right. So I'm gonna create the user. I'll just go ahead and create the thing now. All right, so create the user. Now I just run that describe block again. And then it'll go down through and test each one. Green is good, so we always see. We can now see exactly what went wrong here. And right now we don't have a lot of fancy output, like how many tests ran in what time and all that, because we didn't execute this test with invoke Pester like we're going to in a little bit. But that's kind of the gist of a very simple test, to be able to just categorize what you want to do and then have individual tests for the very unique components. This could be an AD user like we did here. This could be a file, a folder, a registry key, a virtual machine, a server. I mean, it could be anything you want. You first have to just define your object and then define all your attributes that you want to test for that object. All right. So next one is I'm going to provision a domain with DSC, just to show you that this infrastructure test with Pester is universal. I'm just right over there. I just used PowerShell to define the state. Here I'm going to use DSC. You could use Chef, Puppet, whatever you want to get the environment in the specific state. But Pester can come around and just kind of lay over the top of that and just confirm that everything is configured like it needs to be. So I'm going to provision my domain here. Let's see if I can get over here. All right, so this is one thing about the one good thing about DSC, and it kind of follows the same mentality like I did with just those splatted parameters. We break out the configuration and what all the attributes and things are of this thing is supposed to be into something completely separate than the actual code that makes it happen. That's one of the good things about configuration management in general. You have this configuration or manifest or whatever you want to call it that simply defines what everything should look like. In this case, I'm using a configuration data for DSC. So I have the domain name. It should be called lab.local. It should have AD groups. It should have accounting information systems, blah, blah, blah. Here's all the AD groups. Here's all the OUs that I want to, that I expect. Here's all the users with all of the different attributes that each of those users are supposed to have. All of this is not, I don't have all this in code. It's just kind of in a structured, in this case, it's just a PowerShell hash table that's just kind of in a structured format that I can just easily see, okay, all right, yeah, I want to see this. And then maybe future down the road, if you want to add another user, I could just copy, paste it, and just add another user. That's that's kind of the core, the crux of just configuration management in general. In this case, I'm just doing it very generic and making it into, allowing DSC to kind of consume it. All right, so we got that one. So there's where all the attributes, everything is defined. And this one here, all right, so I have a script called new test environment. It's actually a DSC configuration. And right now, this new test environment simply consists of a domain controller with a bunch of AD groups, like I showed you before, has a bunch of OUs. It just has all this stuff that I want to consist of that's going to be in Active Directory. And in this case, I'm using DSC, so I'm kind of using the DSC terminology to where I'm going to loop through each of my nodes in DSC. I'm not going to go harp on what's actually working. If you're not familiar with DSC, I highly recommend you do, but I'm not going to go through the intricacies of DSC. But suffice to say, this is just grabbing all of the nodes where the purpose equals domain controller, and it's getting all the names of the nodes. And if I go back here in configuration data, you'll see here that I have all nodes, and all nodes is an array. And right now I just have one node. The node name is labdc, and its purpose is domain controller. I could easily add another node if I wanted to by just copying and pasting another one in here and just going back and forth from there, but I'm not going to. So this is where that's kind of gathering that from. It's just gathering it from this configuration data PSD1 file. What do we got here? All right. So it's going to grab all of them. That the purpose is domain controller. We could have a bunch of purposes like web server or SQL server. We could have an entire data center defined in that configuration data if we wanted to. But inside of here, we're doing a few things for DSC. We're setting some LCM properties, action after reboot, continued configuration, which just simply means if DSC requires the machine to be rebooted, in this case, it's not. But if it does, it's going to apply the configuration, reboot the machine if it needs to, and then it's going to start the configuration right where it left off there. And then the configuration mode for DSC, there's there's 3 different modes, I think. But for this one, we're just going to apply only. We're not going to apply and monitor. DSC allows you to apply the changes that you want and then monitor every now and then set them back if they come out of compliance. But since we're just going to run through a quick test here, we're just going to apply it once and then it's just going to shut off until we push it again. And then the reboot mode, if needed, is true. That just simply reboots it automatically if it's needed. You probably wouldn't do this in production or something like that, but that's just going to reboot the machine if necessary, if DSC thinks it's necessary. And then after that, we're looping through each of the individual, the entities that we want to do. As part of this, we have 80 groups, we have organizational units, and we're just going to for each through all of those and define the DSC configuration. We're using the X80 group resource, and we're going to say ensure as present. The pipeline variable here, since we're in the for each loop, is the group name, depends on the X80 domain resource. Same thing with here. Exactly the same thing. X80 organizational unit, ensure present. Here's the path. It's just kind of feeding that configuration data that we had in this actual configuration. The same thing we're doing with 80 users, and we're doing the exact same concept with the Windows features that we enable. So we just have a bunch of stuff that we're enabling here and making it happen. So that is the DSC configuration. And just to keep things simple, again, I'm just going to copy and paste it in. In my session there, and then I'm going to kick it off. So in DSC, I first have to create the MOF file. When I run new test environment, that's the configuration. It's going to create the MOF file for me for my local server in this instance. And I don't necessarily have to do this, but I have some LCM configuration properties that I have in here that I set, but I run that. That's just DSC setup stuff. If you're not using DSC, obviously you wouldn't do that. And then I've got start DSC configuration, which actually runs the configuration, goes through and just make sure that the server is in that specific state. You'll see here that's it's just going through reading all the 80 users, the OUs, the everything, setting all the attributes, making sure they're all good, and then if they are, then it's going to change them, or if they don't exist, it's going to create them. If they're different, it's going to change them. So, technically, if you're using DSC or Chef or Puppet, this could be the end. You could just say, I'm fine with this. If DSC tells me that it is legit and this, that here dbaker@lab.local is present, that's good enough for me. But if you have a critical system, or you're just anal about your configuration and your settings, you could create a set of infrastructure tests, and that's what we're going to do. So DSC created the environment. So now we've got the environment built, and since we've separated out that configuration from the actual code to do it, this was the actual code that made it happen. But if you remember, we have all of the manifest of whatever this server is supposed to look like, all the stuff that this server is supposed to have, we have it separated out into a PSD1 file. Because we have this separated out like this, then we can use Pester and PowerShell just to read this PSD file, read it in, and then see exactly all the attributes that we need to set, and then we just need to feed that to our tests. So that's what we're going to do now. All right, so here is tests, and you can see here that it's new test environment.test.ps1. You don't have to, but most scripts, Pester test scripts, in tests.ps1. And I've got a few examples here. We can't go through the whole thing because I'm in Boston at the moment and I don't have my my lab here. But this script originally was had a few different ways to run. So another thing about tests is you have dependencies that sometimes if you just write a simple Pester test, say get 80 user and check all the attributes. So before we just do I have that thing still open? No, I don't. on the 101 case here, we just assume that, or I'm going to create an AD user, and then inside of my test, I just ran get AD user and the identity. By doing that, we're assuming a whole lot of stuff. We're assuming that the domain controller that was supposed to be there is there. We go into levels lower than that. We assume that the Windows operating system, the configuration was right to get the domain controller. We assume that if it was on a virtual machine, the virtual machine that was hosting the domain controller was good. And under that, we assumed the Hyper-V host was there. We assumed the network was available. In testing, it's always better to not assume anything unless you absolutely have to. It's all about, getting granular, and, the people with OCD like me love this testing concept, because we can test the hell out of everything. I can test even, is my wire hooked up to my NIC? Okay. Is my cable plugged in? You can get crazy with all this stuff, but you can define all that as dependencies to your test itself. So that's what this next one demo is going to show you. But I don't have my test environment here, but I can kind of talk to it. Let's see here. So yeah, I'll talk to it a little bit. I'll try my best. So the first line of this test script here is pulling in, using an import PowerShell data file, that configuration data PSD1. So we're pulling in all of the attributes that DSC was supposed to do its job for. We're just going to go over DSC and confirm, did it actually do what it was supposed to do? Next one here, the expected domain controller name. This is all dynamic. I'm not putting anything static inside of here, because I have all this defined again in that separate config. I'm just pulling up the expected attributes, which is the configuration data nodes, and then just where purpose equals domain controller and node name not equals this, because it's a DSC thing. But basically, I'm just pulling up the right domain controller. And then here is where I have kind of gotten fancy with the infrastructure test. So as I mentioned before, a good test doesn't assume anything. So you have to realize, like, whenever we call get AD user, like I said, that's assuming a lot of stuff. So in this infrastructure test, one way you can build these things with Pester and with PowerShell is you can define the dependencies on all these, and then you can even optionally either report on these or actually do something about it. This essentially is building your own Chef or Puppet or whatever config management product, but it's just about the same kind of concept. It's just implemented in a more generic fashion. Sounds like somebody's breaking into a car down there. Oh, there we go. All right. But yeah, it's just implementing in a more generic fashion. So you can see that if I have this, in this instance, if I would have passed full to this new test environment .tests.ps1, it's going to first test all the dependencies before it actually runs the test. Dependencies and the tests are completely different entities. So you can see here that I have DC is pingable is a dependency. DC has PowerShell remoting available. So I define all these dependencies ahead of time. Oh my God, that is gonna. All right. All right, we're good. So in the dependencies, pingable, I have, and inside of here we have the check action, remediation action, and remove action. So if I want to just, before I run my test, I want to make sure all my dependencies are met and I don't want to do anything about it, I can just run this and it can just run the check action. And it's just going to test connection of the DC. Well, maybe I want to take that a step further and I want to actually do something about it. If the DC is not pingable, then maybe the VM isn't there. And in here, for the remediation action for this dependency, if it's not pingable, we'll just go ahead and look into, in this script block here, I could say, this is where I might do something to the VM firewall. Maybe the firewall's on, or maybe the the VM doesn't even exist. The remediation action, you could do whatever you want in here to remediate to make sure that DC is pingable. And then inside of here, I also have a remove action that will, you could even completely remove the thing, rebuild it. It's just kind of feeding all these rules to the dependencies. And the same kind of concept goes with DC has PowerShell remoting available. You have your check action, check the state, the remediation action, change it if it's in the right state, and then remove action. This is very, very similar concept to DSC or a lot of the other configuration management tooling. And inside of here, don't get pay attention to the code very much. I have all this on GitHub if you guys want to digest this, but basically this is just going to run over all these dependencies and then either report or do something about it based on my dependency failure action here. So I set up a parameter that basically says either exit, which means, just report on it, just exit out of the testing script if all the dependencies aren't met, or actually build the dependencies ahead of time. Go ahead and, create that VM or do all this stuff. And when you're done, then run your tests. So this whole dependency checking thing is not Pester by any means. This is more of an infrastructure testing kind of concept that you can use in addition to Pester. But I saw a lot of examples out there online that everything goes into here's how you use Pester or here's what infrastructure testing is. Nothing that I saw actually went into specifically defining all those dependencies that it has and really building kind of a structure around that. And I decided to do that in just straight PowerShell. But like I said, you could use DSC or Puppet or Chef or another tool to kind of get this same concept done. All right. You might have any questions so far?
It looks like your Pester is checking before the MOF has been created. Is that correct? Based off what I saw there?
What would say that again?
Earlier on, like when you actually load the PS1 script that's like generates the MOF, is that correct? It's actually testing before the MOF file was created for the PSC.
Yeah, well, right now the MOF file is created, and then the MOF file, all the instructions for the MOF file were set out and actually did them, and then the infrastructure test is going the other way. If you wanted to actually run your test before the MOF file was created, that's probably goes into more of unit testing realm where you test the code. Your code was structured correctly and all that stuff. That probably goes more into that realm. But yeah, you can kind of inject test rather. Hell, you could even test them off if you want to make sure it's just whatever kind of granularity. When I first started this, I have major OCD when it comes to configuration and is everything just perfect? You can get crazy with tests, and one of the struggles you'll find is once the testing thing kind of clicks with you, you're going to get to the point where you're just going to go crazy and just make tests for everything when it doesn't even matter. At some point, I have this file. So this file takes up this sector on the disk, and you can get really just stupid with these tests. And I did it at first, and my boss was like, why the hell are you testing to make if this is on the right host? Why do I care what Hyper-V host this is on? It's just going to move around. It's like, well, you have to be sure. He's the one that kind of talked some sense into me at one point. But that's one thing that I got into. I get big into OCD about this sort of thing. But yeah, so this was the dependency portion of it, and I'm not going to, like I said, I can't go through all this like I did before because I don't have my my test lab with me. And then I finally have the actual test. All that was just dependency checking stuff. And here I kind of do that same concept as I did in the 101 example. I have that same describe block, getting the forest, grabbing up. I'm doing the arrange section here. I'm grabbing up actual groups, and this is a naming convention that I use a lot. Actual groups and expected groups. Just like I said before, you're going to have your actual state, your expected state, and the test is comparing the two states. Here, I'm grabbing all my groups, actual groups, expected groups. These are the ones that I expect here. Same thing with OUs, same thing with users. Actual, expected, the test is the assertion test, or the test is you compare the two. And then it's just a matter of going through all the tests. It creates the expected forest. Forest name should be blah. Actual groups should be, this is essentially just doing the same thing. If I have, if I have the same counts in my expected groups as I do in my actual groups, then it's good. It creates all the expected ADUs, creates all the expected AD users. And here's a little bit different because, we could get granular on these OUs and groups. Right now, I'm just checking the name. I could check the type. Is it domain local? Is it global? But I didn't. You can get as granular as you want. But here's a good example of it. Creates all the AD users. Technically, I could just say, well, if the SAM account name is out there of all these AD users, then sure, we're good. I could technically just come down here and just say actual user match should not be null or empty and be done with it. I mean, that's perfectly fine, but it just depends on how granular you want to get. Because I took the time to define all that stuff in the DSC configuration ahead of time, I want to make sure, well, sure, the SAM account name is there, but is the given name there? Is the surname right? Is the department? Is the distinguished name? Is it right in the right path? So I just set all these ahead of time and just say should be, should be, should be, should be. Does all those comparisons.
Hey,
And then,
Adam,
yeah,
if I may, I
Sure.
happen to notice in your code you're using an at and then whatever your variable is. Is that so that it puts it in an array? An at sign before your enclosed value?
where do you see that? Right here on 137?
Yeah, like 137. Is that so
Yeah.
that it puts it in an array?
Yeah, I'm doing this because I'm using the count method. If it could be possible, if there's only one, it's just kind of habit of mine. If there's only one entry in actual OUDNs and it's a string and I try .count and it's going to fail. So if I use .count, I always wrap it in an array. So I know it's always going to have a .count method or a .count property on it.
Oh, cool. Thank you. I've
Yep.
run into that myself. Thanks.
Yep. If you use .count, just a habit, always wrap it in an array. That's what I do.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. All right. Anybody else have anything before I go on? Bueller? Nope. All right. Well, the last part is the after all piece of Pester. This essentially just runs the code after all the tests are done. And this, it looks kind of complicated, and it is if you don't even know what Pester is. But and we can go over when I'm done here. We can go over anything you want. So just take notes, and I've got plenty of time if you guys do to go over anything and just the intricacies of Pester or whatever you want to do. But I'll just go ahead and run this now and show you what this looks like. I think I still have it in my. No, I think I have it in my. Blah blah blah. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to get my invoke Pester params here. I'm just going to use path, and I'm going to pass that new test environment.test.ps1 to invoke Pester. And here's where I'm actually going to invoke that new test environment.test.ps1 here with invoke Pester. And I'll show you what the output looks like. Okay, so this is kind of an all-in-one test environment provisioning script. You can see here that I've begin code execution. This is where I did all my DSC stuff. This could be just straight PowerShell. This could be anything. It's plugged in here. I actually set the state of the environment, everything that I wanted to do. But since I'm not going to trust DSC and I want kind of a report of how this all looked at the end, the script then goes down through and then runs my Pester test, exactly like I did before. It creates the user, this forest, the root, the OUs, the users, all this stuff. So that's kind of the first phase of this script that I have. It's very simple. It runs the DSC stuff, makes all that happen, and then runs all those infrastructure tests after. But there's another, the next kind of state is actually does the dependency checking. And don't pay too much attention to, to how I'm doing it. Basically, I'm just passing the full parameter to the test. So I go back over to my test script here, and I have a couple parameters in here. I'm not going to use dependency failure action because the doesn't matter because of my situation, but I have the full parameter to my new test environment.test script. And I have a condition here: if full is present, then do all the dependency stuff. If not, I want to control that. Maybe I just don't care about doing all the dependency checking and doing all that. I can skip that like I did just a minute ago. But if I want to check the dependencies, I can just pass the full parameter to the test script and make that happen. So I'm going to pass the full parameter, and I'll let this go all the way through. A lot of this is doing the exact same thing as the last time, but you can see here I took it to the next level. First, I did a dependency check. The dependency DC ping is pingable, pass. The dependency DC has PowerShell moding available, passed. I checked all those dependencies first, then I began the code execution, which makes all that happen, and then ran the tests. And then here, this piece here, no dependencies built, thus no teardown necessary. That's another spot that I had put in that code to define, if kind of like if you're familiar with Chef's Test Kitchen, how it allows you to dynamically bring up VMs, run the test, tear them down, bring up something, run the test, tear it down. In this instance, I'm just kind of genericizing that in a PowerShell script and saying, if it gives you the option, if it would have built some kind of dependency, a VM would have came up, or something like that you don't necessarily want to be permanent, you have the option to just tear it down if you want after the fact. So I think that's pretty much the demos that I had. All the rest of this stuff we kind of skipped around for, but so yeah, the biggest thing that I wanted to to get across was just I didn't necessarily want to teach PowerShell itself or the code, but the mindset that you have around the testing and especially the dependency stuff, it just really makes you be more purposeful, I guess, in the scripts and the workflows that you define, because the tests don't lie. If you see red in there, you either did something stupid or an environment change happened or something, and anything could happen. Or a tester great for like when your manager comes up to you and says, "Hey, have you gotten that that server built?" Run the tests and you see green. Oh, okay, you did. So it's a really good way to not only verify things, but it really makes you, the same thing with unit tests, it really makes you, it essentially takes you from just a somebody that can just crank out power scripts all day to a really a professional. I don't want to say developer, that's a bad word, but not necessarily a developer, but it's more of a professional tool, I guess you can say. It's really more for the production stuff, for the business critical things, to where you're not just writing a script to just ad hoc do something on your own. These testing procedures are more for company wide or org wide changes that you're making to the environment. And I got a bit.ly link here. I don't honestly I don't know if that's still, I think that should still exist, but if it doesn't, just hit me up on Twitter or something, and I'll share whatever I can. So that's all I had. If you guys have any questions or anything else just related to Pester, or you want to see another little demo, we can kind of ad hoc and do stuff if you want.
I did have a question. Is there any
Okay.
like galleries or like repos that people are sharing Pester tests that they've created that might be reusable for other people?
What was the question?
I think it's totally louder.
Yeah, I know. Talk about it.
Yeah.
For Pester tests, Is there any public repos or galleries that you've seen where people have shared existing Pester tests that they've created? That might
Oh
be-
yeah. They set up. There's really not one central location that has everything, but one good resource to look at is, if you're not familiar with it, is called PoshSpec, and that was done by Chris. I can never remember his name. Yeah, Chris Hunt. That's kind of like a project that kind of sits on top of Pester, and it's more straight infrastructure. You saw by the demo that it was kind of me beating Pester into submission by just kind of pumping a lot of PowerShell into it. But if you're going to use Pester specifically for infrastructure testing, the PoshSpec project here is probably the best free tool that you can have. It looks like it's been a little bit since. Oh no, he's still doing some stuff to it a month ago. It's really a good solution if you kind of want to abstract all that stuff away that I had to do and just focus more on infrastructure testing. This is one good option for this, and it's not necessarily a repository of tests, but as you can see that he's kind of built out some tests already, like a local group is there, a local user, a package, a folder. This is kind of the thing I think you're looking for. It kind of defines out the objects and if they exist or did they not. PoshSpec's one good one, but if you also go to the Pester GitHub repo, I believe they started kind of a shared thing. I don't know if it caught any traction or not. I know that Jakob, one of the main guys behind Pester, wanted to start a shoot, I don't even know if that exists anymore. He wanted to start a shared like a repository of scripts that are of tests that can test different things. But you know what? I don't even know. It doesn't even look like they even have it anymore. So unfortunately, I can't give you a good answer there. Nobody has taken up the fight to actually build a repository. Normally, you'll see in the PowerShell gallery, if you get anything from the PowerShell gallery, that people kind of build their own tests and just define them for their module or for whatever they're doing. I'm not really familiar with a really good resource, unless any of you guys are that have a bunch of these tests all in one. I wish there was.
No, not a fan, but that makes sense. I look at Pester a lot like a DSC in a lot of ways. It's almost like you're writing your own script, DSC resources in a lot of ways. That's how I view a lot of this, but it's OS agnostic because you can really push it towards testing a lot of other things that aren't really OSs.
Yep, exactly. Agnostic is a good word for it. Generic agnostic is just, like you say, you're not really, it's just PowerShell. With PowerShell is the automation glue. You can glue anything you want. If you can run PowerShell, you just kind of put Pester over the top and kind of meld it into one. Hell, and you can have a test that tests the REST API. You can have something to test a file. You can have to test something in Azure, AWS, wherever you want. And it kind of is one. I use Pester a lot. That one example that I mentioned here, that I go into that. This example here of this app that we were in charge of deploying the hundreds of tests. We did, Azure stuff, app services, the API management piece of Azure. It had on-prem. It had multiple VMs that had to be on-prem. It had a SQL server that had to be on-prem. It had a SQL database that had to be in Azure. So we were able to kind of just write the code to check all that stuff and push it all into one test script, and then we could just all make sure all the tests pass that way. That's one good way to put it. Pester is a very agnostic test framework.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Hey, Adam, this is Tom.
Yeah.
I do have one question for you.
Okay.
Lately, I've been messing a lot more with Linux operating systems, and I've actually loaded the 6.0 version of PowerShell. Do you have any idea if Pester supported on that? Do you know?
You know what? I think it does. Find out.
I noticed that invoke web request and invoke REST method, they actually provided a means to get around the certificate problems with the earlier versions of those modules. Which is kind of nice.
I have what does I have here? 6 beta 8 on Mac OS. I'm pretty sure it does. I'm pretty sure it works. Let me just make sure here. Looks like I got 4.0.3 on it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it does.
Pretty awesome. Anything.
I don't know. We could blah blah blah. Unsupported operating system. Maybe not. I don't do a lot on Mac OS or Linux, so I couldn't. I did contribute a little bit of. You know what? We're still running 4.0.3 on here, so your mileage may vary, Tom. I can't. If you break something, it's not my fault.
No problem, dude. I just wondered if maybe you'd already tried it. That was the main reason I asked.
Yeah.
Is there any type of GUI or anything for like management to see? Is there anything like that?
Well, your GUI's right there.
I figured that. But nothing really presentable for management either.
Well, let me tell you this way. You can Pester. It can not only output to the console, it can output it to an XML in an in-unit format. So if you can get that in in-unit format, there's a I talk about in the Pester book. Don't let me forget to give away a copy of that. But in the Pester book, there's a free tool called Report Unit. Yeah, and it gives you and it can kind of consume the output of the Pester tests and then feed it in here. TFS VSTS has the same thing. I think Jenkins has something for the builds that once your tests run as a build task, it can output as an XML file, and then that XML file is read by, in this case, it's report unit, or it could be TFS or anything that reports in unit. In unit's a really standard way to represent tests. So, I mean, this is a good GUI. It's not specific to Pester, but since Pester can output the format, output that XML in the right format, and a tool like this can consume it just like a lot of other different tools. This is a good GUI for you.
Is this not really meant for monitoring? Is that correct? It's just pretty much.
Yeah, monitoring is a different animal. It's not meant for up down stuff. It's mostly meant for it's meant every time your script changes. So we didn't even go into source control and stuff like that. In a perfect world, all your PowerShell scripts are going to be in source control and GitHub or TFS or wherever you want. And then every time you make a change, the test runs right after that to make sure your change did what you expected it to. And then that's part of the build and release pipeline thing. But yeah, monitoring is a completely different animal.
Is there a Pester module that can take care of reading log files by any chance? I'm particularly looking for a relative when something starts at the beginning of the log file and when something ends. So it's more post, not actually while it's happening, because I can't run Pester while the logs that are being generated are being generated.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not familiar with any specific script out there that would do that. But if do you have the code already now in just PowerShell or some other way that can read the log in the right format that you want and return?
Yes, it's a CM trace.
Yeah, if you do, CM trace. In that instance, it's kind of a roll your own thing. You would have to write the code. You would have to do something like
read line,
whatever log. Maybe then pipe that to select string. And do the pattern stuff, and then wrap figure out the code to read it, and then kind of wrap your test on top of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can do any PowerShell inside of Pester, and I'm pretty sure there's a module for
That does
that
it, yeah.
SCCM log file, right?
Oh yeah, if there's already one for it, yeah, you could just put any PowerShell code you want inside it. Right now, Pester is, it's a unit testing framework. I know we didn't go over unit testing, but people have kind of adapted. It's so flexible, but it's because even Pester itself is just a PowerShell module. You can go in and just change the code as you would any PowerShell script. It's really flexible, but with flexibility and open source means, you're kind of going to have to roll your own a lot of the times.
Yeah, I kind of think of Pester as a nice way to spit out that report where it's like, yes, it's passed, or no, it hasn't, and the XML output, the end unit for like importing into Jenkins.
Yeah, I that's how I use it for at work. We have a see if I can give you an example. If as Pester build or something like that. Yeah, in TFS or whatever you want in Jenkins, most of them have test runner build tasks. So if something is checked in, a new script that creates a server, you have a build task that just automatically runs after that. Make sure the test was how it's supposed to be, and if it wasn't, it would fail the build. This is when you get into more the software development piece of Pester, but that's how I use Pester. I'm a automation engineer by trade, and we do. I'm in charge of scripting out test environments and doing build and release engineering and stuff like that. That's where I use Pester for. But it's completely, like I said, it's completely agnostic. An IT pro that just wants to roll out a server can just write a Pester test and then just roll it out and run it and make sure it's it was configured exactly like it was supposed to be. Yeah, here we go. Build succeed. There's a good example of in TFS. The reason that TFS was able to get this passed, failed, and all this information was because that build task in Pester kicked out that in-unit XML. TFS consumed it, and then it's just representing the results in the GUI, just like that free report unit tool did. All right. Anyone else? Pick my brain. Ask me anything.
How much would woodchuck chuck?
3.
Oh.
42. It's our answer.
And don't come to Boston. There's about 10-foot snow piles that you can't even see around. There's so much snow here at one time.
Yeah, we're almost wearing shorts outside.
I hate you guys so much.
Come in July.
Oh man, I was in San Francisco a few months ago, and it was so nice. And then I had to come to Boston. Like Boston, didn't they just get annihilated by a blizzard? And you can definitely see the repercussions of that thing.
Yeah.
I was glad I didn't come last week.
We'll just come here in August. You'll be happy.
I'll be happy because like 110 or something.
110, 120 with 35%, 40% humidity.
No thanks. Okay. Oh, I was gonna. How do you want to do the giveaway? You want me to just use get random or something and find who's the closest to the number, or how do you want to do this? Get random. Here we go.
Did I miss something?
Smaller number. You might want to set a range.
50. There you go.
How about clockwise around the table and just limit it to spinning the room?
How many are in?
Why don't we do seat numbers? 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, so do it up to.
How many people are
All right. What do you want me to do it up to?
There were 13 seats still occupied.
And started with one over there. Wait, he started with 0 or 1. We gotta figure.
Don't array start with 1.
I don't remember.
All right. Minimum 1. Here we go.
Oh, you're-
Drum roll, drum roll.
Alright,
I'm sorry.
alright, who gets it?
Wait for it.
Error.
5.
5.
Congratulations.
You!
Me?
Yes, you.
Alright. Alright, I'll give my info afterward.
Okay.
Alright.
Yeah, just get it to me somehow. If you don't follow me on Twitter, just reach out to me on Twitter or give it to Oliver. Or I'll get it somehow.
Okay.
Tom or whoever.
Tom's back next week, so if he'll take care of
Already?
Yeah.
There you go.
Next month.
All right. Anybody have anything else? Feel free. I have absolutely nothing to do because I'm stuck here all week.
What questions can we come up with?
Oh.
Well, you could be drinking beer then, right?
Well, I'd be hungover, and then the client would get pissed at me tomorrow. So I have to here just drink my Mountain Dew and go to bed at a decent hour. It's boring.
Wait, you drink Mountain Dew, then go to bed?
I can go to I can drink 5 Red Bulls and go to bed and sleep like a baby.
Some people are impacted by caffeine differently, no big deal.
My liver is like jumping and flips thinking about that.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yep, no problem.
Tom, you got anything for us?
Yeah, so our speaker for the next month's session is going to be Jaap Brasser, which I believe he's from like the Netherlands or someplace over in that area of the world. So it'll be kind of early in the morning for him. But hopefully it'll be good. He was a good speaker at the Asia conference I went to in 2015. So it'll be a good session. I should be back in Arizona in February. So hopefully I'll be leading next go round. See what happens.
What's the topic?
I will find that out. I'm not sure yet. I'll post it as soon as I get it.
Well, thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep. See you later.
Bye.
Cool. Yeah, you